How was it, sir?
It was rough. They were waiting for us. What's the count?
2 missing, sir. It looked like 4, but O'Neill made it into Rathfield in Lincolnshire. Gately ditched in the channel. Air Sea Rescue picked them up. 2 wounded, but not bad.
Well, that'll help us some. Let's get up to interrogation.
Yes, sir.
These are scenes from the popular war movie 12 O'Clock High. There were hundreds of movies made based on the folklore surrounding World War II. I drove to Blues Creek, North Carolina to gain insight into some of the unrecorded experience of a World War II Air Force veteran and prisoner of war. In the interview that follows, Bealer Moore, age 75, shows us how strong memories can remain after 50 years as he hands down in the verbal tradition an important part of our American heritage. You'll notice a silver-haired lady in the background. Her name is Nell Moore, Bealer's wife of 55 years. She also lived through her own prisoner of war experience as she waited and worried.
Yeah, Carl Sagan, thanks.
Was anything being said about the United States going to war?
Yes. All the newspapers and, well, even in our commencement exercise in 1941, the speaker said that this class here will probably face a lot, what did he say, a lot of danger and everything there. Mm-hmm. But there's no telling what this class will have to go through because of the war clouds over Europe.
At what point did you know you were going to be in the war?
At what point in my life?
Yeah.
Even then, I figured that America would be in a war because of the way things were shaping up.
Did you volunteer to get drafted?
No, I volunteered. I would have been drafted, but I was working at Glen L. Martin in an airplane factory right after high school, and I would have been drafted, but I decided that I wanted to go in the Air Force, and so I joined up.
What year was that?
1942.
Would you have been branded a coward if you didn't fight in World War II?
Well, I don't think. Well, at the airplane factory, a lot of women would ask me, my age and all young, why I wasn't serving my country in the war, and so they would because they would say they had a lot of brothers and sisters and husbands and all already fighting, and here I was, a young boy. And they wanted to know why I wasn't in the service, and even though I was working in an airplane factory. And so it got kind of boring. So that's one thing that made me want to get away from there.
It got embarrassing.
Yeah, embarrassing.
As a new recruit, what were you being told about going to the war?
As a new recruit, basically, they found out I wanted to fly. I was sent to Miami, Florida, for basic training, and I never had any basic training at all because they found out I wanted to fly, and so they were needing gunners or flyers from overseas, and so I didn't get a day of basic training. I was sent right to a radio school in Madison, Wisconsin. Never had any basic training, didn't know how to fire a gun or anything at that time.
Did the military give you any idea how long you'd be there?
No.
Explain your training.
Well, Madison, Wisconsin was a radio school for radio gunners. Finished radio school and was sent to Kingman, Arizona for a gunnery training. Stayed there for approximately 3 months. Never was at a place over 3 months. And at Kingman, Arizona, at gunnery school, we fired 30 calibers and 50 calibers, and in training in gunnery school. And then, along about that time, they were losing so many planes over Germany that I decided that I didn't want to go overseas right at that particular time because it was really hot over there. So I joined the cadet and stayed, probably stayed a year in the flying cadets till I washed out. And then I went overseas as a gunner.
How many men were on a B-17 bomber?
10.
What were the ages of the different men?
Probably around 24. The average age on there was probably about 24. And the youngest, the ball turret gunner, was 17, and they had to take an act of Congress because he was not supposed to go overseas at that age, being that young. And so his mother knew a congressman and got him. They were going to take him off in our crew because he was too young to go overseas, but she knew a congressman, and so he was allowed to go with us at 17.
What was the oldest member?
29, the pilot.
What was your personal life like at the time you were being sent to war?
Personal life. I was married at that time, and
Any children? Or
no, not at that time.
what year were you sent to war, actually?
1944.
And where did they send you first?
England.
What were the conditions like in England?
At that time, they were. I guess we were fed real good. The Air Force had good food, and the civilians were very friendly, and everything was all right. Although England said, a lot of people said England was the most dirtiest country they ever visited.
Where did you live?
I was stationed with the 100th Bomb Group at Fort Abbott, a little town near there called Disk. But Fort Abbott was our little small village, and we would park our planes behind the farmers' houses out there, and the kids would play all over them. But we didn't care because they didn't hurt anything, but they would climb all over them. And it was just a village, you know, and that's where we were located in England.
How did the English feel about you being there?
Oh, some of them resented it. You'd go to the pub when you were not flying, and you would play darts with them, and they soon learned to accept you. And but when the attitude, I think the most general attitude about soldiers being over there was what I said. They were the English had a saying. The American soldiers were overpaid, oversexed, and over here. In other words, a lot of them didn't like us being over there.
Right.
But on the whole, they knew what we were doing, how we were helping them out.
How many missions were you to fly?
I was to fly 25, and then I could come home. But at that particular time, only 2% of our base there were finishing their missions and getting back home. The rest of them were being shot down or killed. 2%.
What were you bombing and where?
I was bombing an oil refinery in Magdeburg, Germany, on the Elbe River, probably about 30 kilometers south of Berlin, an oil refinery.
What did you do in between missions?
Mostly I rode our bicycle into a little town called Disk. We would go in every night. We wouldn't eat the food in the mess hall because we would go to Disk, which was approximately 3 or 4 miles away, and we would ride our bicycles up, and we would eat fish and chips, which were a whole lot better than any food in the mess hall. Although we did get fresh eggs before every mission. Not powdered eggs, fresh eggs.
What did you do in between missions?
Mostly,
Hang out in the pubs.
yeah. Well, at night if we were at night, we'd go down to the pub, which was probably about a half mile away, and play darts with the civilians there, and that was basically about all we would do.
What group or division were you in?
I was with the 349th Bomb Group, division in 100th Bomb Group, which was called the Bloody 100.
Why was it called the Bloody 100?
There's a story that we had a signal if a B-17 was over enemy territory or was in trouble and the formation had gone on, if you let your landing gear down, it was a signal for German fighters to come in and escort you down to a base. That was a signal if you let your landing gear down. The story is that this bomber was in trouble and he let his landing gear down, and two ME-109s came up beside of him going to escort him down, and they shot him down and made it back to the base. But we had a feud between the German Air Force and the 100th Bomb Group. It was reported that the B-17 dinghy, which landed in the English Channel, and they were on life rafts, and the German Air Force, ME-109s, came over and strafed the men on the Air Force and killing some of them, and so therefore that's why the feud started. Now, and they hated anything with a D on it. Our emblem on our tail was a D, a large D. And they would leave other formations if they spotted that D and come after us, because we had a feud between the German Air Force and our squadron. All because they said we didn't obey the rules of war. They let the landing gear down and then shot down the two ME-109s.
Did any servicemen ever decide to quit flying missions?
Yes, they did.
What happened if you did decide that?
They told us when we first got to our base, two officers made a speech, and they said, at this present time, only 2% of the airmen are finishing their 25 missions and getting home. If you want to quit, don't ever make the first mission. If you make the first mission and then you quit, you're considered yellow. And what they would do, they would put you in the chow line serving your crews that you had trained with. You would be in the chow, feeding them, feeding your buddies that you went through training with, and they would consider you a coward, a yellow coward, if you quit flying. And they warned you, now you can quit flying anytime you want to. Don't ever take the first mission. If you take the first mission and then quit, you're considered yellow.
Did anybody do this?
Oh yes, a lot of them quit.
How many missions did you fly before you were shot down?
17.
Did anything unusual happen before that last mission?
Yes, I had a friend that loaded our bombs and our gas, and he would come to me over at my barracks and tell me what kind of mission we were going to be on the next day. If it was a heavy gun load, gas load, then we would know we were going deep into Germany. And a lot of times he would tell what type of bombs we were carrying. Fragmentation bombs or incendiary bombs, which would set things on fire, or heavy bomb load. And we could tell by that about what type of mission we were going on. And this particular night, he came, I went over there. I went over to his barracks and I told him the red flag was flying on the headquarters door, and that signal that we were going on a mission the next morning. They would put the red flag out. And I had a premonition that I wasn't going to make it back. I just had that feeling. And so I went to Thomas, his name was Thomas, and he was from my hometown. And I told Thomas, I said, Thomas, I'm not going to make it back tomorrow. I said, I have that feeling. He said, oh, don't talk like that. I don't want to hear that. I said, no, I know I'm not going to make it back. I said, I don't believe I'll be killed, but I have a feeling that I'm not going to make it back. And so I said, I tell you what I want you to do. I want you to get all of my pictures and I was collecting pipes, smoking pipes at that time. I said, take all my possessions and send them to Nail. And I said, under my bed is a brand new pair of 4-shine shoes. You can have them if they'll fit you. And in my raincoat, there's an extra 45, Army 45. You can take that, because we didn't take pistols with us on the mission. You could if you wanted to, but we didn't. But anyway, I said, you can have that 45. It's yours. But I said, I want you to be sure to get over to my barracks and collect all of my personal stuff and send it to Nail. Because when a crew got shot down, there was 2 crews in a barracks, one of these Quonset huts, and a lot of times people listening in on the radio could hear what was going on over Germany, and if a plane was going down, well then they would jump on their bicycles and go over and get all their clothes, get everything. And so I told Thomas that you be sure that you get my personal stuff and send it to Nell. Well, he was listening in on the radio, and he heard over the radio that Scott's crew was going down, and they counted the parachutes and everything. So he jumped on his bicycle and went running over to the barracks, and he did. He got my pipes and everything that I personal stuff. But anyway, on the trip across the English Channel, Pop, the tail gunner, it was an all-out effort. There was 1,000 airplanes. It was an all-out effort that day. And Pop said he was back there in the tail gunner, and he was tail section, and he was taking pictures. And he said, well, when we get back, we'll go into disc and we'll have these developed. But when he said, when we get back, I did something that I'd never done before. I reached down and got my Army shoes and tied them to my parachute harness. Before, I just left them on the floor. And I tied these GI shoes to my parachute harness. And it's a good thing I did, because when I opened that parachute, when it came open, my shoe flew off my foot. The flying boots flew off, and that was the only I had. Of course, I had the Army shoes tied to my shoes, so I had a pair of shoes. But I wouldn't have had not done that. But when he said that, something just rung a bell. When we get back, well, I knew I wasn't coming back. I didn't think I'd be killed, but that was it. That was a premonition that I had,
What were you bombing?
We were bombing an oil refinery at Mattingburg on the Elbe River, just probably about 30 kilometers from Berlin. And we really hit it. There was a tremendous fire there. There was probably smoke and fire 15,000 feet in the air. We really tore that target up.
How many died on your mission?
2, the pilot and the engineer. They got killed. They didn't get out.
Where did you end up when you bailed out of the plane?
On top of a 3-story building in Mattingburg.
Who found you?
The Germans. 3 German soldiers and some Gestapo agents were in the room when they stripped all my clothes off, and they beat me. I took a beating, because they had warned us anytime you come down in a town that you just got through bombing, they would beat you. Were lucky to get out of there with your life. And it was on Saturday at 11 o'clock during the day, and there was a big crowd in town, and they were civilians, and they saw me, and only 3 soldiers there, plus the Gestapo. But the Gestapo was the one that beat me up so bad.
Did you think you'd be killed?
Yes, I did. I really did. I thought I would. I didn't think I'd be killed in the bombing raid, but after I landed and after the treatment that I got, I thought I would probably not make it out there alive. Because of the way I was treated.
Where did they take you?
To a civilian jail in Mattingburg.
How long were you a prisoner of war for?
Well over 9 months.
Were you in a Stalag?
Yes, Stalag Luke 4, the worst camp in Germany. It was in Poland, and it was the most terrible camp. I was in several camps, but that was the worst one. I was taken to Frankfurt on the Main for interrogation, and stayed in a solitary confinement in a room about 4 by 8, 4 foot wide, 8 foot long. You couldn't stretch out one way, and I stayed in that room for 2 weeks for interrogation. Couldn't talk to anybody. Couldn't get out but one time a day. And they would let you go to the bathroom one time a day, and you couldn't talk to anybody because there was no one in the room with you. That was interrogation. I stayed in there for 2 weeks. That was at Frankfurt.
Did you ever see a concentration camp?
Oh yeah, I saw Dachau and Fallenwasser. Auschwitz, yeah. I saw 3. I was in one for 5 days in April. Where I met James Pentecost. He was also a prisoner of war. James Pentecost was from my hometown, and he's the one. He was liberated. He stayed in an outdoor Johnny house, what we call outdoor toilet. He crawled. He tried to get me to stay with him, but I wouldn't do it. And he stayed down in there until he was liberated. We knew that we were close to being liberated because there was a lot of air activity, and you could hear small arms fire. And we knew that the Allies were real close. We didn't know who they were, but so he stayed there. That was the 1st of April, and he stayed there for 3 days down in this toilet. up under the seat there, and he stayed there for 3 days until he was liberated. I walked on, and he got back home before I was ever liberated. And he told the people, where, I don't know how Neil got a hold of him, but
Because everybody in Roxborough knew everybody. And James had told uptown that you would never make it back, that he had seen you just before he was liberated. And the way you looked, that you couldn't have lasted more than 2 or 3 days.
yeah, I was on.
And he told that, and so of course the word got to me. And but let me interject, because when he was shot down, I got a telegram, of course. I had said to my mother, she and I was staying at my mother's, and I had said the sun was going down, and I had said, well, another day has gone by, and I haven't received a telegram, because it had been about 3 or 4 weeks since I had heard anything from him. And I said, another day has gone by without a telegram. Well, about this time, the taxi drove up and presented me with the telegram. Of course, I was pregnant. I was due to have the baby in a month. And, of course, everybody in Roxborough, being a small town, everybody knew I had gotten this telegram. And everybody that I knew came to my mother's. And even the doctor came out and, of course, gave me several injections to put me to sleep, which didn't. It didn't work. And people stayed around my house all night long with me, because I stayed awake all night. And thereafter, it was about 6 weeks that I had not heard anything, knowing that he was just missing in action. And Gwen was born, our daughter, was born during this time. And my sister, who lived in Newport News, came up and said, now, Gwen is old enough that she can take a trip, says, come stay with me for a while. So Gwen and I went with her down to Newport News, and it was there that the telegram came that he was a prisoner of war. And of course I came home. Thrilled to death.
Was it common knowledge that the Jews were being put to death?
yes, yes, it was. Although the civilians didn't believe it, but I remember, I believe it was Doc Al, that Eisenhower made the whole town. It might have been Treblinka. It was one of them, but he made the whole town, all the civilians, go through this camp to witness what was going on there. And they pretended that they didn't know anything was going on. But on a railroad car, I was being transferred from Frankfurt, Germany, over to Poland. And a German guard told me, he said, you see that black smoke coming out of those smokestacks over there? And I said, yes. And he said, they are burning Jews. That's smoke from the bodies that they are burning. So they did, the soldiers knew it. Now, the civilians claimed that they didn't know it, but I feel like they did know what was going on. I certainly believe that they knew what was going on. Although some even today said, no, it happened. But I know it did happen because I witnessed it. I was in 3 of the, I saw 2 of those camps and was in one for 5 days. In April, they put out an order that they were going to strafe everybody on the road, and we got strafed 6 times, and some of them got killed. And what would happen? We'd be walking down this road, be 400 or 500 in a group. And the Germans would tell us now, if you see American planes or anything, don't break formation. Wave your hand at them, and they'll know you're prisoners of war. Well, what they would do, instead of waving their hands, they put their helmets on and dive over in the ditches. And when they would do that, then we would dive over in the ditches, and then we would get straight. And so, yeah, we got strafed about 6 times. And one our RAF pilot strafed us, and several of them got killed, and it was rumored. I found out later that after he found out who he had strafed, he went and committed suicide. It shook him up so bad, But they couldn't tell. And what they would do when we were going from Frankfurt and over to Poland in these boxcars, they would put Red Cross on top of the boxcars to indicate that we were prisoners of war. But the Germans hauled so many troops to the front line in these Red Cross buses, they didn't honor it, they didn't respect it. So they would fire. We got strafed on a train one time, It didn't kill any of us, but he blew the engine up. I was looking out the barbed wire window back in the 40 and 8 boxcar, and I saw this P-38 come down, swoop down like that, and I said, "Uh-oh." You know, and he shot a hole in the engine. I saw the engineer jump off and rolling down the tracks, and he fired him. And when the train finally got stopped, we went up there, and he had a hole in that boiler about that big. But he didn't know one of us get hurt.
How far did they march you?
Well, I was in Poland at Stalag Luke 4 in February, around the 1st of February, and we walked all the way across Germany, walked across the Kiel Canal. They were getting us out of the Russians. The Russians made a drive to liberate us, but the Germans didn't want us to be liberated by the Russians, and so they started us marching in February. Snow all about a foot deep on the ground. We walked all the way across out of Poland, all the way across the northern part of Germany, up near the Baltic Sea, crossed the Kiel Canal, and I was liberated between Hanover and Hamburg, which took 3 months. 3 months of walking.
Did you ever try to escape?
Yes, but I was caught, and the first time I hid in a pile of wood, and I found out very quickly that I didn't want to do that again. I was beaten really bad. And there was no need of escaping. I could have left found out later, I could have left any time I wanted to, because it was one guard, approximately 300 or 400 men walking along the road. You could leave any time you wanted to. And at night they would put you in these barns, and you could leave in it. And but they told us that it's best to stay with the group because you may get into what they call a death zone, and if you didn't know how to read German, you would automatically be shot right on the spot. Because if you were caught, anybody caught in one of these death zones, you would be shot immediately. And so it was best to stay with the group, which I found out. And so I didn't try to escape at one time. I did hide out in a stack of wood, but I got beat pretty bad, so I didn't try that again. But I could have left any time I wanted to on that road march. In the camp though, we had a mess hall. It was laid out in blocks, about six barracks down each side, and in the middle of the compound, of about the size of a city block, there was a mess hall where they would go and prepare the food, potatoes and cabbage, and they would change at night. They would put about 10 people over at night, and we would dig a tunnel. And up near the Baltic Sea over in Poland there, the ground was real sandy, and you could dig tunnels, and so we would change. The Germans, they kept account of how many men was in that mess hall sleeping during the night, but we would go in there and we would take turns, and we had about 4 tunnels leading out from that mess hall to the outside edge of the barbed wire. And one day, I think it was about in December, they brought what they call it looked like a bulldozer. It looked like a thing that you pave these roads with big rollers on them. And they got inside of the gate, and they would go probably about 100 feet, and they would fall in. And they found every one of those tunnels. It would fall in, they'd dig it out, and they went around. We had 4 tunnels going out of that, so we didn't try that anymore.
Who found you behind the woodpile?
Hitler Youth. And they were rough. They were about 12, 14 years old, and that was one of their main jobs, to go around through the country riding bicycles. And they had a knife, but they didn't have any arms. They didn't have any pistols or anything. But that's what they looked for: escaped prisoners. But only very few, once they ever got inside of Germany, only very few Americans ever escaped. Very few. I expect it was probably less than 50. I knew of one case where a young boy, could speak German, and he got out and he got a cow, and he led that cow all the way across Germany. But he could speak German.
Were Air Force prisoners treated differently from infantry?
Yes, absolutely. We were not allowed outside of our compound. We begged for them to put us on a farm and let us work where we could get potatoes and milk cows and things, but they would not do it. The infantry, they let them work on farms, and they fared real good because they could eat, they could milk cows and get milk that way, and potatoes and things, and they fared a lot better than people locked up behind barbed wire.
Did any infantry prisoners of war stay in Germany after the war?
I think a few did. Yeah, I think a few did. Yeah, they fell in love with German girls, Frauleins, all that. Yeah, some of them did stay.
Did any German guards speak English?
Oh yes, you never approach the German guard, especially a young one. You stayed away from the young ones because most all of them could speak English, and you stayed away from the young ones. Now the old ones, they were a lot like we were. They didn't want. A lot of them said they didn't know why we were in the war. They didn't want to fight, and they were guards. And most of our guards were crippled on the front. They either had an arm off, they either had a leg, a bad leg, or they had an eye out. And most of them were cripples that they could not be fighting in the German army, and therefore they put them guarding us.
Why? Why were most of them crippled?
A bit on the Russian front, a lot of them. You could tell a German soldier that had been on the Russian front. He had some part of his body missing. Most of them gouged out their eye. And they were wounded in some way, and so the Germans used them as guards.
What did you eat as they marched you across Germany?
Potatoes.
Tell them about shoving pigs.
Oh yeah, they would put us in this barn at the close of a day. After maybe sometime we'd walk about. Average walk would be about 10 miles, and they would crowd as many into a large barn. And the barns in Germany were tremendous. They were large barns, and they would put maybe 200 or 300 guys in a barn, and they'd put a machine gun up at front door and the back door. And the only way they'd let 2 out at night. If you had to go to the bathroom, you would call for the guard and he'd let you out. And if there was 2 already out, he wouldn't let you out. Yeah, and a lot of times you would have pains and all that, and it was horrible condition. But anyway, they would put you in these barns at night, and I usually would go find a place to sleep where we could stretch out, and then my buddy, he would go look for something to eat. We would steal everything that we could find to eat in order to get by. And a lot of them, they couldn't milk. They didn't know how to milk a cow. And these slave laborers, these barns had maybe 300 or 400 cows in there, and they would wink at you. They wouldn't strip the cows down. They would wink at you and leave milk, in the udder, so you could go there and you could. We had a tin can, and we could go there and move the milk. And we would get milk that way, and we'd catch the guard on the other end of the barn, and we would milk the cows, And they had these long troughs there, probably about 30, 40 foot long, and they would take and fill the troughs up with buttermilk, and they would boil these spuds, these potatoes, and pour them over in there, and then they'd turn the hogs loose in there, and we would kick the hogs out of the way. And I had a GI sock about that long, and I would fill that thing up full of boiled potatoes, and the next day on the road, which you never knew when you were going to get any food, and I would start eating those potatoes, and so I made it real good.
Tell them about the guy who followed the chicken around, waiting for him to lay another egg.
Yeah, a lot of these.
Did you ever get any letters from home?
I only received one Red Cross cablegram and telling me that my daughter
Had been born.
That was the only message. And had I waited 6 days, I received that cablegram in February, the 1st of February, and had they waited about 2 or 3 days later, I wouldn't have received it. I wouldn't have known anything, because we left that camp in February, around the 1st.
And I sent that telegram on the 16th of September. That was the day she was born. And it was February before he received it.
I never will forget. I still have the cablegram. I never will forget that morning. We were all huddled around the stove trying to stay warm. And the Germans would come in every day and inspect the camp. They inspect the rooms and all. They would open the door. And that morning, this German stuck his head in the door and he said, "Is Sergeant Moore in here?" And I said, "Yes." And I noticed, I saw the Red Cross on the cablegram, and I said, "Uh-oh." And he said, "I have some bad news for you." And everyone, all my friends said I turned as white as a sheet because I knew Neil was due. And he said, "I have some very bad news for you. And he knew it really upset me because then he started grinning. He said, "You have a girl instead of a boy." And he handed me the cablegram. But that really shook me up. But that's the only thing that I received from home, the only word that I received from home.
And the point is, I was allowed to send 3 packages a month through tobacco companies. I could send cigars, cigarettes, and they had said, and Bealer at that time didn't smoke, of course. And I would send all this. They said, send it because they can use it as barter.
Yeah.
But he didn't get any of them.
No, I didn't. And very few packages.
And I sent 3 packages a month, which I was allowed to send.
What does your wife know about your capture?
That was part of it.
A lot of propaganda. They went to a meeting in Charlotte.
Yeah.
And
Red Cross held a meeting in Charlotte.
And they really fed them a bunch of bull, a lot of propaganda, telling about how we were in school over there, how the Germans were sending us to school and all that stuff. And that was a bunch of bull.
And it was one soldier who had been liberated, of course, and he said that the food that they served was filled with worms, and it was real watery soup, and worms would be floating on top. And so this lady I was with, whose brother was missing in action, and she says, we want to talk to him, because he was the only one that came out with something derogatory to what others had said. And so when it was over and we cornered him, and he says, lady, I can't tell you no more. So we knew then things were not what had been fed to us, that they were being treated in such a nice way.
I'll tell you, the basic food, we had 1 slice of bread with jam for breakfast. And it was it was what they call black broad. It was a dark bread made out of sawdust and potatoes. It was horrible stuff. But anyway, before it was over, it tasted like chocolate. But anyway, slice of bread with a little bit of jam and breakfast. At breakfast. Dinner, we had 1 bowl of either cabbage soup or either a bowl of potatoes, and for that night for supper we had a bowl of potatoes or cabbage, and that's all we got. That's what they fed us.
Were you ever worried about being bombed by friendly fire?
Oh yes. But what they would do down near Munich, we were down there for about 2 weeks when I was first captured, and over in the valley it was ammunition. It was evidently a machine gun factory down there, because we could hear them test firing the guns during the day, and we kept wondering why no one was bumming that place, because they were making them. We knew they were making machine guns, because we could hear them test firing. And so one day, after we were there about 2 weeks, that siren, the air raid warning went off, and so the Germans rushed us all in the barracks and locked the door. And this camp was probably about 5 miles away over in the valley. And we heard the bummers come over, and we figured that they were bumming that plant down there, and they did. And those barracks would start racking when those bums went off. And they didn't want to let us out after the raid was over with, because they knew we could see over what happened over in the valley, and they really tore that plant all to pieces. They really leveled it, man. That really made them angry. And another time that we were in the marshalling yards at Berlin, and this was probably the worst scare that I received the whole time I was a POW. This was horrible. We pulled into Berlin late in the afternoon, and it was about this boxcar would hold 40 men and 8 horses, 40 and 8. They had 30 in each. You couldn't stretch out. It was 30 in each end, with the doors there where the guard was stationed. They had barbed wire in each end, and they had 30 in each end. Well, they pulled us into Berlin marshalling yards late in the afternoon one evening, And that night, the RAF, instead of bumming the marshalling yards, I don't know why they didn't bum the marshalling yards. They bummed the railroad station. And when they came over, the way they bummed, they would drop a flare, and it would light up the whole area. And then one bummer right after another would come over and drop his bums on that flare. And they, which the station was about 4 miles up the track there from where we were. And the Germans, what they did, they went and locked the doors and took off to the air raid shelter and left us in those boxcars. Had they bummed the marshalling yards, we would have probably been all burnt up, because they took off and left us in there. And every time those bums would go off, that boxcar would jump up and down, and they just bummed the station up there instead of bumming the marshalling yard. And had they bummed the marshalling yard, we'd have been gone, because we couldn't have got out. They locked us in there and took off to the air raid shelter. But that was probably one of the most scariest moments. Guys were hollering and crying and praying and carrying on, because it was a scary time. You could read a newspaper inside that boxcar. But they just bummed the station instead of bumming up the marshalling yard. But that was probably one of my most terrible times. I thought I was gone. Everybody else did.
What worried you the most as you were being held prisoner?
Being shot.
What news did you get about the war?
Very little. Very little. We didn't even know about anything about the Battle of Bugs. The only news we would receive was when some guys get shot down and they'd bring him to they'd put him in with us, and most of them didn't know what was going on, because they were like we were. We didn't. The only thing that bothered us mostly was what kind of mission we were going on, or the war. We didn't pay too much attention to what was going on in the rest of the world. But the Battle of the Bulge, we started getting in infantry. They would keep the Air Force and the infantry separated as much as possible, and they started bringing in infantry men, and they would tell us what was going on, and that was the only thing. In fact, I didn't even know Roosevelt had died. A German soldier. We were walking on the road there one day, and I was whistling. It's a long ways to Tipperary, and he said, "Well, you'll never go there." And then he said, Your president's dead." And I thought, well, that's a bunch of bull, he's German propaganda, He said, "No, Roosevelt's died." That was in April. He said, "No, Roosevelt's dead." Well, we didn't know. I didn't believe him, but it was true. He did die.
What if something happened to you in which you needed a doctor?
I was not supposed to go overseas with wisdom teeth. That was the Army, the regulation, Air Force regulation. You could not go overseas with wisdom teeth. You had to have them pulled. Well, I didn't, and I went overseas with my wisdom teeth. Part of them. Some of them hadn't come through. Well, when I got overseas, the dentist asked me, he said, "How in the hell did you get over here with your wisdom teeth?" And I said, "Well, I tore up the paper every time I was supposed to report to the dentist." He said, "Well, if you ever have problems, you'll regret today. If you get shot down, you'll regret today, because wisdom teeth can go bad on you." Well, anyway, I cut one while I was in Germany, and I laid flat on my back 2 or 3 days begging guys to split my gum, and because the Germans wouldn't give me any medical, they wouldn't give me any aspirin, anything. And what I did, I chewed on a spoon until that tooth came through, and that was absolutely hell. Well, it finally came through, but they would not give you any kind of medicine whatsoever. And on the road march, I had a guy, we had a medical officer named Kaplan, and he was from Michigan, I believe, or Wisconsin. But anyway, he was a Jew, and the Germans would not give him any medical supplies or anything. They claimed they didn't have them. They didn't have enough of their own men. And a lot of times we would pull into these barns, and he would hear of a POW maybe 3 or 4 miles down the road in another barn who was sick, and he would ask somebody, and most of the time I would go with him. I would walk by ourselves. The Germans would let us go. They would let us go down to the road 2 or 3 miles there, maybe to another barn, and he would go down and do what he could for maybe dysentery. A lot of guys would have dysentery. They would eat anything they could find to eat on the road, knowing that it would give them dysentery, but they didn't care as long as food. And this doctor would beg us not to eat anything like raw turnips or raw potatoes or anything, to be very careful what we would eat, and a lot of times the Germans would tell him, so, well, you got a sick guy down the road, and so he would ask for somebody to go with him, and we'd go down, and he would try to do whatever he could for him. A lot of times, men would have blisters on their feet, and from walking all day, not taking care of their feet, not giving them the proper treatment and all that they were supposed to have, and there was such things as dysentery. Most of it was dysentery. You see guys along the road, they're all doubled up with cramps and all, and vomiting and in all kind of conditions. But most of it was dysentery.
Tell them about your broken ankle and pop.
Oh yeah.
Helping you through.
Yeah, I made the mistake. I broke my ankle when I landed on top of a building over there, and the German wouldn't put it in a cast, and they said they didn't have enough plaster Paris for their own men. But anyway, I made the mistake of not exercising, walking on that leg as much as I should have, and when I got out on the road, it started swelling on me. And a slave labor made me a crutch that I could put on my arm, and I could walk like that with my leg, and it gave me a lot of trouble. And at night, when they put you in the barn, if say you're with a buddy, if your buddy was one step ahead of you, the Germans would come down the line counting, and he might be separated from you, and you might not see him for 2 or 3 days later until you got with him again. And Pop, the tail gunner on our crew, he was separated with me. In fact, I didn't see Goff, the ball turret gunner. I didn't see him but one time the whole time I was in camp. On the road march, I never did see him. Pop was the tail gunner, was the only one that I ever saw, and I think he saved my life. He went with me and carried me 2 or 3 days there, helping me along and feeding me and everything. And he stayed with me until we got separated. As I said, the Germans would come down and counting off so many that they thought would fit in a barn, and then you would go maybe 2 or 3 more miles down the road to another barn. And so Pop managed to stay with me 2 or 3 days, and I think he saved my life by staying with me. But that's the way they would do it. They put maybe whatever they figured a barn would hold, maybe 200 or 300 men, and then they'd march the others on down the road.
Why was the tail gunner called Pops?
Because he was the oldest on our crew.
He was the one that was the oldest, 29.
He was 29. We called him Pop.
And in fact, why couldn't you eat raw vegetables?
They were overseas. Well, I don't know if they told her or not, but you never eat anything raw in Germany, because they would take human manure and take it out and fertilize their crops with that. Especially during the war, because they couldn't get fertilizer and anything, so they'd take everything from a toilet and take it out there and spread it on the ground. And they would warn you never to eat anything raw. And the water over there was no good either. You had to boil your own water. You dared not drink out of a spigot over there or anything, because you would get dysentery right off the bat, like that.
Did many men die on the march?
Yes, they did. Then most of them died from dysentery.
And what did they do with the dead?
I don't know. We see, they would keep us marching. We walked every day, and we never knew what happened to them. And a lot of them got beat up because your German soldiers would have, a lot of times they'd have their girlfriends ride along on bicycles on the road march. And they wanted to be, if they got to this certain town or camp that barn that we're going to spend the night, they would get the better places, whoever got there first, the German soldiers. And so if you were lagging behind, they'd beat the hell out of you, trying to get you to walk, and so they could get there first, you know. And whoever lagged behind suffered, because a lot of times they would beat the fool out of you, and you really caught it if you were behind, didn't have anybody to help you walk along, you know. And because the German soldiers, they wanted to get to the barn first, but naturally, so they could get the best place to sleep.
When and how were you liberated?
I was liberated by the British Second Army, May the 2nd. We were on it was foggy, real foggy that morning, and I never will forget it as long as I live. We were walking down this road, and a German dispatcher on a motorcycle came whizzing by, and the German captain tried his best to warn him to slow him down because he knew that the British was up ahead on this road, and he wouldn't stop. He was trying to get out. He had some kind of important message probably, and he went on by. But in a few minutes we heard machine gun fire, and then he finally came back, and the German captain stopped him, and he told him that the British was down the road. And a few minutes later, half an hour later, a British tank come rumbling up the road there, and there's about 400 of us in that group. And the top flew open, and I'm not going to tell you what he said, this British guy, but he stuck his head out the top, and he said, if any of these bloody so-and-so Germans have mistreated you, take their damn gun and blow their bloody guts out. He said, kill them, shoot them. Now, they were frontline troops, and I don't think any of them got shot. I think maybe one of them might have got shot. The one that mistreated us, he was a giant of a man. He was looked like he was about 6'4", great big German, and he would kick you and boot you around and all, and he was really hated. And I think they took him out there and worked him over. I don't know if they killed him or not, but we were so glad to be liberated that I didn't want to bother any of them.
How much did you weigh before and after?
I weighed about 170 pounds when I was shot down, and when I checked in at the hospital, I weighed 110 pounds.
How did the English get you out of Germany?
They flew us out on a Lancaster bomber. Flew us to Brussels, Belgium. When they liberated us, though, near Hamburg, in a little town there, and they told us that we don't have transportation for you, the war is still going on. You'll have to walk about 30 kilometers to this town, this little small village up there, and spend the night there. And he said, if you have any trouble with the civilians in this town, he said, I don't know if any of them are still there or not. It was about 12 houses there. And they said, if you have any trouble, come back and get us, and said, we'll drive them out for you. Well, the house that we stayed in that night was liberated. No one was living in it. The lady looked like she might have been preparing lunch because she had a bucket of potatoes there that she was peeling, and they had not turned dark. And evidently, they didn't have time but just to get what few belongings, because the drawers of the clothes and all, it was just like they had suddenly rushed out when they found out the British was coming. And the amazing thing about that house, it was a beautiful brick house. And by the front door, right by the front door, there was a hole about that big, and you could bend down and you could look all the way through, and it was a shell that went through that house, and it didn't explode. It went all the way through the house and didn't explode. But the house looked like that the people just gathered up the few rags of clothing and took off. She was evidently preparing a meal, because the bucket and all was just there, potatoes and all. But they took off. And all the houses in that town were no one living in them, so that's where we spent the night. And we had to walk about 30 kilometers to this airfield, and then they flew us to Brussels, Belgium.
Did you witness any atrocities as you were being marched throughout Germany?
Yeah, well, all kind of beating, but they kept us out of town as much as they possibly could. They would not let us walk through a town, and once in a while they would have to go through a town, and when they did, you were subject to getting hit with a brick bat or anything, because they hated American airmen. And when they found out that we were airmen, they would really throw bricks at us, and they would treat you terrible. They hated American airmen.
Did you or any of your friends bring back any war souvenirs?
The only thing I brought back was a Hitler Youth knife and a razor. That's all. I had a beautiful double-barrel shotgun with silver inlaid on it, and it was a beautiful gun. And they told us that we could not bring back any type of gun that would be taken away from us. And I had to walk about 30 more kilometers, and that thing got heavy, and I wrapped it around a tree. Well, at this certain town, the British went into this town there, and they brought out some German P-38s, and still had the grease in them and all, and they brought them out, and they had cases of them there, and they told us to take anything we wanted, take as many of them as we wanted. But after walking all the way across Germany and all, no more than I weighed, and so weak as I was, I took 2 of them, but I carried them on the ship, and I come to find out You could bring back anything that you wanted to from over there, any kind of gun or anything. And I sold them to sailors on that boat. I sold those two pistols. And also in this town, they had a beautiful camera shop there. They had some of the prettiest, well, the Germans noted for their cameras. They had some of the prettiest cameras you ever laid your eye on, and you could just go in and help yourself. But I didn't, at that particular time, I didn't care anything about a camera. And I didn't bring back anything. The only thing I brought back was a German straight razor that I shaved with that night, and I brought back a Hitler Youth knife. That's the only souvenir that I brought back. Could have brought back anything I wanted. One guy even brought back a racehorse from over there. He did. He was from Texas. He brought back a racehorse from over there. They told him that when we got on the boat, he was there with that horse, and they told him, says, you'll have to stay here till he gets inoculated and get till he passes inspection. But you can certainly bring him back home.
How did you get home?
On a hospital ship.
Tell him that's the name of the accordion.
This one guy brought back a beautiful accordion, and he would play that thing. He could really play it, and he played it all the way across on that boat. He would play it. You could hear that accordion all the way on that boat. He would play that. He would play that thing all the time. It was beautiful. He picked it up somewhere over there as a souvenir. But anyway, when we got to Camp Patrick Henry in Virginia, we were allowed to call home. First time any of us could call home. And it was probably 50 men in there waiting to use the telephone. There was about 6 phones there in this room. And he was playing that accordion, and everybody was hollering and saying, hey, play us a tune. And so when his turn come to go in to make the telephone call, he told another guy, said, hold my accordion for me. So when he went in, he wasn't in there very long. He came back out. Somebody told us, says, hey, play us a tune. He grabbed that thing up and stomped and tore it all to pieces. He had gotten what they call a Dear John letter. His wife had had left with his uncle. And he really made him so mad he grabbed that accordion up and tore it all to pieces.
How long were you on the ship for?
14 days.
14 days.
14 days across. We left La Havre, France, and landed at Norfolk, Virginia 14 days later.
After you got home, what'd you do?
Well, I could have gone to Miami for 3 months and staying in one of the most beautiful hotels on Miami Beach. That was all the deal for all of American BOWs. You could go down there, nothing, everything free. Stay in a hotel for 3 months, just like a tourist. No Army regulations whatsoever. Right on the beach. But I had been to Miami for the basic training, and I hated that Miami Beach. I didn't like it there. And Nell could have gone with me, and Gwen, our baby, could have gone and stayed right there with me. But I decided that I had much rather stay at home. And so they paid me my expenses, what it would have cost the American government for each GI staying down in Miami. They sent me the money instead. And I stayed at home for 3 months.
Did the Air Force offer you any compensation for being a prisoner of war?
Yes, I turned it down, and I felt like it. I don't know. I felt like I was okay, and I didn't. So I didn't apply for a pension.
Were you awarded any medals?
Oh yeah, Purple Heart twice, and Distinguished Flying Cross.
There were a lot of movies made after the war, about the war.
Yeah.
Films like Stalag 13,
Yeah.
The Great Escape, and 12 O'Clock High.
Stalag 13 was probably more like the original conditions. They had tunnels going, and it was more like the original condition, except for one thing. I don't know if you saw the movie or not, but they would allow in the movie, they could bunch up and sing songs and do all kind of things. But in our camp, you were not allowed to bunch up. You could not have a group session. That they would shoot at you from the tower. Anytime a bunch would gather together, they would think maybe you were plotting something, and they would fire on you. And you were not allowed any kind of gathering whatsoever. But I noticed in the movie, but solitary confinement was entirely different too. When they put him in solitary confinement with the glove and the ball, he was in there where he had plenty of room. In solitary confinement, you only had about a 4 by 8 room, you couldn't stretch out one way. You could stretch out this way, but you could not stretch out one way. And that was another thing that. And you did not carry on with your guards, didn't like they did in the movie. You would not carry on or talk to them like they did in the movie.
In the movie, The Great Escape, the prisoners were allowed to have a 4th of July celebration.
No.
Fly the American flag.
No.
That didn't happen.
No way. Now it might have in some camps, but in the camp that I was in Stalag Luft 4, that was a horror camp. It was one of the strictest camps in Germany, and one of the most hard camps in Germany, and you were not allowed anything like that.
Did any prisoners ever escape in the way the movie depicted?
If they did, I don't. Like I said in the beginning, very few. Once you got inside of Germany, very few of them ever escaped. Now we tried. We had tunnels and everything, and on the road march, like I said, the 3 months that we were marching on the road, you could leave anytime you wanted to. They didn't have a one guard, maybe, or 2 guards to 400 men, and you could at night they'd put you in a barn, and they would put a machine gun at each end of the barn, but they'd let you out 2 at a time, and you could leave if you wanted to, but it was probably safer to stay with the group than be turned loose in Germany.
What was the hardest adjustment you had to make when you got back from Germany?
Eating.
Getting used to Gwen.
Yeah, I had a hard time with Gwen because coming home with a child, I had a hard time with her. But eating, I had a problem with eating for a long, long time. I couldn't eat.
Did you ever hear from any of your old crew?
Oh yeah, they let's see, 2 of them. The tail gunner came to see us, and also the ball turret gunner, the young guy. He lives in Gobles, Michigan, and he came to stay with us about a week one time. He's been down twice,
Yeah, and the sister of the one who got killed came
from
a
Oklahoma.
couple of summers ago from
Yep, from Oklahoma.
She was only 5 years old, and she doesn't remember her brother, only what was told, and she came.
And they write occasionally and call me occasionally, but all of them's dead except 3. 3 of us. 3 of us is still living. The rest of them.
Well, has anything strange ever happened to you concerning your years as a POW?
Jay, oh yeah, seeing one of my German guards in POW camp had recognized him at this delicatessen at Jay's in Greensboro. We went over there one night, and they evidently catered to a lot of German people, or German food. They had a lot of German food there, a different kind of food. And we went in there, and I recognized the German guard inside the store. And I came back out, and Nell said I was white as a sheet. She knew something was wrong, somewhere or another. And she asked me what was wrong, and I told her that I recognized the German guard that I had when I was a POW. And she said, well, how do you know? I said, I know. I just recognized him. And so I went back in, and then I asked him if he spreken the Dutch, and he said, yeah. And so I found out that he was at Stalag Luft 4, but he was a good. He didn't bother anybody, and so come to find out that he had been captured by the Russians in some way or another. The Americans took him over. I don't know how he got to America, but what he was doing at that particular time, he had a job in Greensboro, and he was tile setter. He had a business in Greensboro, and he invited me out to his house several times. He would lay this tile around cement pools and all, and that was his job. But that was the only time I've ever come in contact with him about it. But I knew immediately that I recognized him immediately that he was a German guard. But like I say, he was all right. He didn't bother anybody, he was an older type of fellow.